Hello, everyone, and good day. Welcome to our first intentional critical conversation of the academic year. On behalf of our entire college community, welcome to today's conversation. While I wish I could be with you, I have jury duty today. You're in for an engaging conversation with Massachusetts Supreme Court Judge Shannon Frison. Justice Frison's journey to the bench is fascinating and a tremendous case study in perseverance, discipline, and drive. We appreciate you being here with us and for your support for our ongoing work to bring diverse stories to the forefront of our community. And now let's start the conversation. Please welcome our host of Intentional Critical Conversations, Sarah Ann Samito.
Hello and welcome to the second year of Intentional Critical Conversations. I'm your host and academic coordinator, Sarah Ann Samito. And I'd like to take a moment to let everybody know what we've been doing here at Cape Cod Community College. And the first order of business is letting you hear and see our newly adopted land acknowledgement. So Tilden Art Center, could you please raise that for us so I can read it to the audience? We acknowledge that we gather as Cape Cod Community College upon the traditional ancestral land of the Wampanoag. We condemn the unjust deeds done in the past and honor with gratitude the land itself and the indigenous people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. We commit to uplift Wampanoag and indigenous voices and continue to work for reconciliation through collaboration in our role as better neighbors. And if you've been following Intentional Critical Conversations for the past 2 years, you know we've always done a form of land acknowledgement that I like to say comes from the heart. So we know we're in the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the home of the proud 54th Regiment, and also the land of the Micmac from Dorchester, Mattahunt School, if you grew up in the city of Boston and Cambridge. And we know that we honor the Cherokee that have migrated north from North Carolina here. Most important, we want to honor our Caribbean students who are, remember, as I stated, fall under that Arawak umbrella, who may be Garifuna, Aztec, Incan, Mayan from South and Central America. Really important, our Taino brothers and sisters. So that land acknowledgement honors all. We honor you, we welcome you, and we respect you here at Cape Cod Community College. So if you're new to this program, I need to take a moment to just fill you in on what we've been doing here at Cape Cod Community College for the past 2 years, our changing narratives throughout the 21st century. And when you look at our logo, serving, protecting community, we as higher ed professionals, of course, are protective of our students, our pedagogy, our curricula, and of course, curricular design. However, for the last few years, we've been looking at our institution with a critical eye, aligning our, what we call a strategic plan closely to the Department of Higher Ed's equity agenda, looking at implicit and explicit biases in our curricula, and even how we word things in our syllabus, and how we speak to each other, how we work with students of color, and we're looking at to close those achievement gaps. When you look at that logo, please take a look. You will see the variation of the American flag because we all come in different shapes, sizes, races, creeds, genders, and gender preferences. The equality flag because we love who we love, and it's just that plain and simple. The Pan-African flag, if you remember from the first Intentional Critical Conversation, that came out of a movement of the 1920s. And please also know the red stands, of course, for the blood of the African that was spilt throughout the transatlantic slave trade and throughout the Americas. The green for the richness of Africa and the black for the color of the African. But also know Pan-Africanism embraces everybody and all. And most of all, remember, we all originally came from Africa. So please recall that. Also know that we are using tools such as Mass Department of Higher Ed Equity Agenda Plan, Racial Equity Justice Institute, which used to be called Leading for change. All of this to ultimately get our students, females specifically, and students of color, and definitely first gen with a credential in hand across the stage, feeding the workforce and feeding our four-year public institutions. Really important to share that this year, Trustee Gomes, who will come out in a moment, Dr. Cox, along with myself, and a few students, the call went out to many students. 150 responded. Ultimately, 8 traveled to a historical Black college, Morgan State University, which we're in the makings of an articulation agreement. We're looking at matching programs. However, we're also looking at it, retention. What are historical Black colleges doing that we are not doing, where they're retaining students? And a lot of the students who went on the trip were from African nations, specifically Cabo Verde, Haiti, and Jamaica, and had never heard of a historical Black college. And they were surprised at a historical Black institution that they actually saw white students there and white faculty there. So you see, diversity goes both ways, and that's what we're trying to do here at Cape Cod Community College. I'd also like to give a shout out to the Connect institutions. Some are on the call. Bridgewater State, of course, Massasoit Community College, Stonehill College is here, some Divine Niners, Delta Sigma Theta. I know Sigma Gamma Rho is definitely here, Quinn Sigma and Kappa Alpha Psi are here. This program also is looking to help start conversation. Really important when we look at moving institutions forward and looking at systemic racism and structural problems that have kept women and people of color from achieving goals in higher education. So even when we have conversations such as this, you may be a little disturbed by some of the narratives and stories that you hear, but please know that they are all true. And these guests have been selected because they serve and they protect this community, not just Barnstable County, but Massachusetts as well. So this program also really came forward based off of a horrible tragedy back March 2020, the loss of Miss Breonna Taylor. And we had one of our few guests, a 9-year-old at the time, Miss Grace Hoff, sing a children's prayer. She didn't know the difference between a bench warrant, a no-knock warrant, or a warrant. And now as a 5th grader, she still does not. Later on, that year of 2020, we had the loss of Private First Class Mexican-American Vanessa Guillen, who was a community college student in Texas. And that kept this program going. And as Dr. Cox stated in the recording, I'm the host. Yes, I'm the host and the founding mother and creator of this program, but that old African adage and proverb, it takes a village. It takes a village. A voice has helped raise this program. And this program was ultimately galvanized by the murder of Mr. George Floyd. And it kept going with the loss of a serviceman, Elder Fernandez, Massasoit Community College student who went missing from Fort Bragg. And we debuted October 2020 an Oh So Ordinary Tale with Chief Bobby Barrows from Bunker Hill Community College. We've had student voices here. We've had Shaman Brown, who's proud to be from Roxbury and proud to let everybody know that she is of Mashpee Wampanoag descent and has been on the program twice. We've had funeral service associate science graduate, Jay Rojas, Will Moshe, Raven Barry, and today you're going to hear from criminal justice student, Emily McCarthy. We've had Wizard of Wheelock, Wheelock Family Theater, a theater that included all gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, anybody who wanted to perform. And one of the founding mothers, Dr. Susan Kossoff, opened in 1981. First musical there was Superman, and Clark Kent looked like me. We heard also from Professor Jennifer Alai. She spoke so eloquently the words from visual artist and poet, called home far too soon before his time, of the Kiowa people, from Oklahoma, T.C. Cannon, who didn't live long enough to see one of these acts pass, the American Indian Burial Act, that he fought so hard to have passed. He was a Vietnam veteran, once again, serving his country. Newly retired, Gretchen Whittegren read from the words of Maya Angelou. Very prolific, allyship. Reverend Andrea Seuss Taylor, Reverend Andy of St. David's Episcopal Church, who bravely and proudly put out the words, "God bless Mr. George Floyd," and put on the lawn of that church, "Black Lives Matter," no matter how much pushback she got. And she spoke of allyship, true allyship. And what does it mean to be an ally to your professionals of color, your staff of color? And it's speaking to and with, not for and not at, but uplifting those voices. And we had Ana Mendez. We had Danielle Legros-Georges, Haitian American poet, staff and faculty at Lesley University, City of Boston poet laureate. So when she said those words, "sec passe, liberté no pousse," we felt this little room shake. And we knew that Haiti was the first Black free republic in this hemisphere. An embargo upon embargo upon embargo put on that country. She answered the call when Cape Cod Community College asked her to come, not only to share her story, but in response to the assassination of their president. And finally, we had a prolific one that touches upon intersectionality, attorney Kimberly Crenshaw's work. We have Putting It All Together and Making It Work with Judge Janine Rivers, Dr. Arlene Rodriguez, Donna Walker, Mia Hazlitt, two former staffers here. They talked about being Black, Latin, some openly gay, some immigrated to this country, some were bilingual. So we've been doing a lot here at Cape Cod Community College, and that brings us to our guest today. But before we bring her out, I'd like to turn the program over to Trustee Alexander Gomes, who has a few words to say today.
Thank you, Sarah Ann. Hi, and welcome to everybody who's tuning in today. As Sarah Ann said, my name is Alex Gomes. I'm a Board of Trustees member for Cape Cod Community College. And on behalf of the program, I would really like to take a second just to honor our guests today. And from the students, the faculty, and the staff, I extend a warm welcome to Justice Shannon Frison. And I'd like to also acknowledge the college's idea committee and our curator / coordinator, Sarah Ann, and all the work that you do bringing this to life. I think it's really important to have these conversations because it's just during these times, sometimes you might feel alone being either the youngest or the first Black or brown, whatever it is, if you're at work or you're part of a committee, maybe even part of a board, and you can't relate to certain individuals or your stories don't align. These conversations help to bring those realities to life, and it just lets people know that tune in that you're not alone. You're not the only one feeling these feelings, and you need to value yourself, value the work that it took for you to get where you are in the position that you're in. So with that being said, I'd like to pass it back to Sarah Ann.
Thank you, Trustee Gomes. And Trustee Gomes has been coming on campus to spend time with students. He traveled to Morgan State, as I stated earlier, did a true rock star tour with us. And so now I'd like to introduce you all to a criminal justice student, Emily McCarthy, who you will find is hardworking and one of the most giving students you will ever come to know. And she is very soft-spoken and she's hiding behind her camera. So Emily, come on out.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Intentional Critical Conversations with a very special guest, Justice Shannon Frison. My name is Emily McCarthy, and I am a current student here at Cape Cod Community College, and I'm in my last semester here. I am very honored to be a criminal justice student here, as our instructors provide us lessons and opportunities to not just learn how the criminal justice system operates, but also history and its shortcomings and what we can do to change it for the better. In my time at the college, I have been fortunate enough to learn about cases in history such as Brown versus Board of Education, where the Supreme Court was tasked with determining if schools separated by race was equal, as well as modern day cases such as the police use of force in the murders of Eric Garner and George Floyd. Being a female in the justice system has its challenges, but I have been given the tools here to excel in the field. My goal one day is to be a juvenile probation officer and to continue my education at Bridgewater State University. I just wanted to thank everyone for being here today and thank Justice Shannon Frison for joining us as well.
Okay, thank you, Emily. So we all know, if you've been following Shannon Frison, that she's a Harvard graduate, attended Georgetown University. She's a Marine, and she has a life committed to service. That's in the bio that's been on the Intentional Critical Conversation page. And if you scroll down, you'll see the other guests there. We've had numerous guests: Martina Spada, Sergeant Crispin, who then moved on to become Deputy Superintendent Crispin, Boston Police Department. And we've had Nina Scheffler, a white woman who had no problem stating, I wanted to meet with the Black Panther Party to find out about their breakfast program in the 1960s. I want to learn what I can do to support people of color and actually support people of the African diaspora. So all of these people have been in service and have been community people. A lot of these people, you can see their bio there, and hopefully you've had a chance to read Justice Shannon Frison's. Some of the words that she uses to describe herself: poor, Black, and tattered. Some of the words that Sarah Ann Smito uses to describe her: humble, strong, giving, community partner, an advocate for those who cannot advocate for themselves, and a voice for those who cannot speak up for themselves yet. She comes from a line of people who were freedom fighters. Her grandparents risked their lives back in the 1960s to register people to vote. And I also feel she is a dynamic persona. We're very lucky. Harvard was lucky to get her. She just honors us in Massachusetts. Yes, we have Sotomayor. I'm so honored and blessed. And we have Katanji. I'm so honored and blessed. But we also have Justice Shannon Frison. So before we bring her out, I want to let you know, start to think about questions to type into the chat, because she will answer those questions. She's going to speak for about 20 minutes. And I really want her to touch base on something, and I want you all to ask her about this. It's about biases. I will not finish the story, but if you are a Gen Xer, you do recall hair bands and metal bands of the 80s. And there's a certain symbol that they give, certain hand sign signal that they give. The rocker Pink does it, Avril Lavigne and Ashley Simpson do it. Shannon Frison, Justice Frison, is no stranger to selfies, and she took one, which she can, and she did a certain hand gesture. So I will let her, somewhere in her presentation, finish that story. So let's give a huge Cape Cod Community College welcome to Justice Frison.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who just spoke. This is a special program. I'm so happy to be here with you. Unfortunately, we are still doing some things virtually. Some people love that, some people hate it, but it does at least allow for us to come together a little bit more easily. I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of my experiences and some of my thoughts about race and bias in this country, but I really do want it to be a conversation. So please do think of questions that you have or input that you want to make in this conversation as well. I will give you a little bit of information about myself and about the work that I do and the things that I talk about that impact people that look like me and people who are also in the same struggle of defeating bias. The first story mentioned by Ms. Sumito was an incident that I talk about a lot. I do talk to a lot of students, a lot of young lawyers, a lot of older lawyers about trial advocacy, about race and bias. And I have occasion to recall certain things that I have experienced. On 2 occasions, I have been accused of being a gang member. And as exciting as that might be as a life choice, it's certainly never been mine. The first occasion was some years ago, around 2006 or 7, and I was representing a service member. That service member was in Okinawa, Japan. She was a Black woman, and she was a sailor. That sailor was accused of conspiracy to commit murder and essentially alleged to have masterminded a plot to kill her husband's mistress. And this plot was supposedly created with the help of gang members in the Crips gang, which you may have heard of. It's I believe, a gang beginning in California, but has spread across the country and is pretty well known. And some members of the Crips gang were supposedly a part of this plot to kill this other service member who was my client's husband's mistress. When I flew to Japan to represent her, I was flying there as a civilian. So I had been in the Marine Corps. I had come off of active duty. I'd returned to Boston to work, and I was representing some people who were accused of crimes, who were service members, sailors and Marines. And that work would take me abroad to different places. So I flew to Okinawa to represent this particular client. And on the first day of the trial, we did what most military courts would do with the members of that jury. Those members are standing members for several months. So we take some time to make sure there are no conflicts before we begin the trial. The senior member of that jury was a full bird colonel. I was there in my civilian capacity, but I'd been on that base. I'd worked on that base. I'd been stationed on that base. I knew the military judge. I knew the prosecutor, and they knew me as a Marine. And at the time I was a major. But I was there in civilian clothes and as a civilian attorney on behalf of this sailor. The military judge went through with the members what the allegations were and essentially what the case would be about. The only question that the senior member asked the judge that day was whether my tattoos were gang related. Now, you see me here today, you may have seen me online, you see that I have a full sleeve tattoos, have tattoos on my neck, have a lot of tattoos. At that time, I only had maybe a couple, and one that you could barely see if you're really trying to look under my shirt a little bit. So I was not sort of covered, and you could just partially see a bit of a tattoo. But of course, at this juncture in the trial, I had already been introduced, done my oath as defense counsel, as you have to do in military courts, and everyone knew the role of everyone in the courtroom. But this senior member, this colonel, asked that question. Well, the military judge essentially did not answer his question, removed him from the jury, replaced him with another service member, and we continued on with the trial. That day, at the end of the day, we let everyone go, the jury and everyone out of the courtroom, and it was just me, the military judge, and the prosecutor. And we had a good old knee-slapping laugh about what had happened with that scene and the question that he asked. And I laughed with them, but of course, it really wasn't funny to me. It was mortifying to have flown thousands of miles to another country to represent a service member accused of one of the most serious crimes you can be accused of, and certainly the most significant event in her life, and trying to keep her out of the brig, and to, on the first day, be suspected of being a part of the gang, to say the least, was jarring. And it took a while overnight and until the next day for me to sort of get over that incident in order to do the work that I was there to do, which was to try the case. I did try the case. I did secure an acquittal of her on the conspiracy to murder charge. She did not spend any time in jail or in the brig. She was removed from the Navy, but we were anticipating that anyway. But my ultimate goal of not having her incarcerated, I did achieve, despite what happened at the beginning of that trial. The second time that I was accused of being a gang member, I was a judge. Yeah, I was a judge already. I've been a judge for 13 years now. And this happened maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, which Ms. Samito just referred to, this incident, in which I was on the Roxbury division of the Boston Municipal Court. That's where I began my time on the bench. And in my lobby there, I took a selfie. And the group that I remember doing this pose was the group KISS. And from my childhood, I remember them doing this everywhere they went, on stage, in interviews, in photos, everywhere they went. They were doing this, kind of thing. And, I think they tried to trademark it even at some point. Well, this was just a cool thing and a cool pose and something people did to sort of, signify their irreverence or whatever. And I did that pose and I posted it and said something like, yeah, you can't be serious all the time. Just sort of a, open-handed ode to that group. And a few years ago, I reposted that photo and someone took a screenshot of it, sent it to my boss, the chief then of the Superior Court, and told her that I was throwing up gang signs on Instagram. Again, exciting as that life may be, that is not the life that I lead, obviously. And it just struck me as very strange, one, that someone was taking the time to follow me and what I'm posting, screenshot it and give it to my boss and make some random allegation based on that screenshot, and what the allegation is or was. Why would, saying, maybe that I'm doing something silly on Instagram, or sticking my tongue out on Instagram, but throwing gang signs. Now, I'm sure that almost anything you can do with your hands at this point is a gang symbol of some sort in some state of some neighborhood on some block. But to me, the sort of playful kiss gesture was something that was pretty universal and that I thought everyone would recognize. My chief did bring it to me. I had a long conversation with her, and then I had another conversation via email about the role of implicit bias and why one of just a couple of Black judges on this court would be accused of throwing up gang signs for doing a gesture that I think if anyone else did would be taken for what it was. Those are instances in which the assumptions that people make, whether it's about race or tattoos or anything else, take the interaction to a place that it does not need to be, and to a place that's not truthful. But you may say, well, things have changed since the murder of George Floyd. And I'd like to really think about that. I too was a part of the captive audience that watched the murder of George Floyd on TV, on video, so many times, over and over and over. Those heartbreaking 9 minutes that we all endured with him and after him. Why was it that the murder of George Floyd became the impetus for a real reckoning in this country? I call it a reckoning about the racial history and bias that affects us to this day in this country. My thoughts on it are that it is a strange confluence between the happening of that and the filming of it and the pandemic, in which we were all essentially on lockdown and probably more often than not watching more TV and more news than ever before. But why that murder in particular, why that particular mistreatment of a Black body? Why not Tamir Rice, Amadou Diallo, Eric Garner, Mike Brown, Walter Scott, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Freddie Gray, Laquan McDonald, Breonna Taylor, Dante Wright, Sandra Bland. I could go the rest of this meeting naming names with the exact same significance. I don't know that we'll ever know the exact reason that it was George Floyd that began this reckoning, but I'm glad that we're here. I did a TED Talk a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, and it was just released on the TED site. And I talked about some of this in that TED Talk and about my service on the bench and how it relates to it. I am 52 years old. I'm Black. I'm an American. I'm a justice of the Superior Court. I'm originally from Chicago. My family lives in Mississippi. I've been practicing law for, I had been practicing law for 14 years before coming on the bench. I've probably been practicing law about 27 years, and I've been a Marine for about 28 years. I am newly married to a woman, and I do have a full sleeve and neck tattoos and many other tattoos. So in some respects, I'm somewhat of an anomaly on this court and in the Commonwealth in this type of position. There is a lot about me that you could take issue with in terms of bias. You may not like Marines. You may not like tattoos. You may not like women with short hair. There is a lot that you could take issue with if you didn't actually know me. The main issue that I see with implicit bias and bias generally is that it strips us of the ability to do what I try to do every day, which is to treat the person that I'm interacting with as a whole person, not treating them as their last or worst act, or treating them as their worst day, or treating them as an allegation, but actually considering the whole person in order to make an appropriate determination about them and their circumstances and any of the things that I need to do to adjudicate the matter, including fashioning a sentence if it's a criminal matter. Bias strips us of that and causes us to make assumptions, conclusions, and decisions without treating people as whole people. You are studying bias, among other things, and so I will spend less time defining that and going over exactly what that is than I would normally do. But I will spend more time talking about how it's affecting us today and why, if you follow me on social media or if you come to my courtroom or if you see me anywhere, you know that I'm always talking about these issues and always keeping these issues in the forefront. In 2020, the judges of Massachusetts learned that as a whole, we impose higher cash bail on Black and Brown defendants, and we impose longer sentences in prison on Black and Brown defendants. We had anecdotal evidence before that, to be sure. But from 2020, we have a Harvard study that was by the Criminal Justice Policy Program there, who studied our numbers in Massachusetts and illuminated these disparities. More specifically, for folks who are Black or Latinx, you're more likely to have your case resolved in Superior Court, where I sit, where the sentence range is higher, up to life with no parole, for charges that we have exclusive jurisdiction over. And even in charges in which there's concurrent jurisdiction between my court and the district court or the DMC, you're more likely as a Black or Latinx defendant to have your case indicted and brought to Superior Court when that is left to the discretion of the district attorney or the prosecutor. As a Black or Latinx defendant facing weapons and drug charges, you're more likely to go to jail and more likely to go to jail for longer periods of time. And for Black and Latinx defendants with what we call mandatory minimum charges carrying mandatory minimum sentencing, you are more likely to go to prison and more likely to go to prison for a longer period of time. These are pretty stark disparities. There's a report. The report is public. It's online. You can read it, download it, digest it. And it was a real smack in the face to the Superior Court. This is not something that's occurring back in the day, back in the 1800s when we came out of slavery. This is not something occurring in some corner of the world that you might think is unenlightened. This is right here in Massachusetts on my court. And this is one of the reasons that I talk about it a lot, because these disparities have to change. We can no longer in Massachusetts go around saying, oh, you know, these kind of things happen in Mississippi and Alabama and Florida and Texas and Georgia and these other states that we think are Southern and backwards and whatever. Well, as we find out, our numbers are running neck and neck with those states in terms of the disparities in the criminal justice system. And I am not a statistician. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a social scientist. I'm not a scorekeeper, but I am a judge. And what is striking is the level of disparity and the uniformity of that disparity. It is literally based on the biases against dark skin. The troubles that we face that are spawned from implicit bias are never ending. And they don't just hit us in the criminal justice system or hit us when it comes to finances and getting loans and mortgages, or hit us when it comes to housing. It is literally in all of that. And it follows us throughout our lives. You may have recently watched the confirmation hearings of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. She is my classmate. We were in the class of 92 at Harvard together, undergraduate, and I got to see her this year just before she took the bench on the Supreme Court at our class reunion over this summer. If you watch the confirmation hearings, you may have been as frustrated with me that it focused so much on critical race theory, Dr. Kendi's book, Anti-Racist Baby, and other issues regarding race that Justice Brown Jackson may or may not have spoken on, written on, expressed any thoughts on before, but she was essentially used as a way to get into those conversations. And the challenge to her, I thought, was particularly futile because her record and accomplishments speak for themselves. And I think that's what eventually allowed her to be easily confirmed to that position. But if you recall the hearings and I remember thinking that the whole tenor of the conversation was, well, if you're going to be on the bench, you better not be thinking about race. And it struck me, as it always does, as so rich that in a country in which race is probably one of the most significant impacts on a person's life and trajectory, and is a factor in almost everything that happens to someone who looks like me, or almost everything that I do or accomplish or go to or achieve, that once I am in a position of authority, there is this sort of overarching theme of you better not be thinking about race while you're in that position, which I have always found to be utterly ridiculous. It's not that I should not be thinking about race in this position, but it should be, how am I thinking about race in this position? When I was beginning my career as a lawyer, I joined the Marine Corps. I joined the Marine Corps while I was in law school. I know, just a strange path, but after my second year of law school, during that summer, I went to officer candidate school. We could talk about why I made that choice. I became an officer, came back to school, finished school, and after that, I came back up here, joined the district attorney's office during the year that I was studying for taking and awaiting bar results. And then after that, went on to active duty for a full tour in the Marine Corps. When I started my path in the Marine Corps, I went to an officer selection office. I was in law school, so I could join as an officer. And those are the offices that set you up and get you spun up and get your paperwork done to do that. At that officer selection office, it was in Hyattsville, Maryland, the Black gunnery sergeant in that office told me, you know, look, if you are serious about the judge advocate program, you're gonna have to do something about your hair. And I was like, what's wrong with my hair? At that time, I had started little dreadlocks. I had little baby locks on my head. That wasn't allowed in the Marine Corps. Neither were braids, none of that. And so I did. I got rid of them. I cut my hair, but I went to something that was probably controversial as well, which was a short cut. And that was sort of throughout my career, either loved or hated. And something that's now, I think, a lot more commonplace. And I like to think that I'm one of the plank holders, one of the trailblazers with regard to hair in the Marine Corps. I went on to the MEP station where we get our physical exams. I went to the MEPs in Boston. And at that time, this was before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The medical doctor in the course of my examination asked me if I had a problem, if I ever had any problems with homosexuality. And so I didn't have any problems with it. I don't think that's what he meant. I don't think he meant it like that, but I was able to answer no because of how he put the question. But yeah, it's probably surprising to hear that, you know, in the course of this professional medical exam, a question like that could be asked. And that's the Marine Corps that I came up in. Going on right after that to TBS, to the basic school in the Marine Corps, where all officers go after Officer Candidate School. This is a 6-month harassment package that you go through of infantry training. And when I got there, my platoon commander, so the platoon commander I would serve under for the 6 months, in my first evaluation, told me that when he first saw me, he said to himself, "Who is this person posing as a Marine?" Now, you know, what all he saw in a Black woman, an attorney, someone with their hair just kind of like that, what all made him think that I was posing as a Marine or feel that, I don't know. But needless to say, I was highly offended at that comment. And it's not at each point along the way in your life that you're gonna have a quick made ready answer to people who come at you with bias. It's just not the case. It may be a long time coming before you can speak to people on the spot when something like that is said to you. The journey through fighting and trying to defeat bias is something that I talk about, and I talk to people in groups and individually about, because we are literally all in it together. When my last law firm that I worked at, I tried a case with a partner there, and it was a murder case. And sometimes we would walk together from our offices to the court or to the jail where our client was. And on one of the last days that we did that walk together, we had just seen my client, we had just handled a probation matter for him, but this was still pre-trial, pre-murder trial. And my client was Black, and the men that he was accused of shooting were also Black. And the partner that I was working on the case with, just out of the blue walking, said to me, "You know, there must be something wrong with the Black family." And I continued to listen and, said, "Oh, really? Do tell." And he said, "Well, look at what, the Black family created in this young man, our client." And I was struck by how many levels of wrongness this was on. I was the only Black person at the firm. And this was a firm who represented a lot of people accused of crimes, mostly white collar crimes. And sometimes we would do what I call blue collar work, which I like to focus on, which were the murder and those types of cases. And the insistence that somehow the Black family as an institution somehow created someone who was now accused of murder just struck me on so many levels. And I didn't even know what to say to him at that time. But I did think about it overnight and come back to him the next day. And the next day I talked to him. My office was right next to his. I went in, requested an audience with him. And I told him, that I was offended by his comments. I told him that I was glad that there were no summer associates with us, because I thought that folks younger than me would be even more disparaged and traumatized by his comments. And I told him that if he wanted to talk about race in the workplace environment, that wasn't the way to do it. I offered him 3 books, and I offered him 3 books that I'd read, and said, if you read these 3 books, then you can talk to me about Black families. I did not get fired. That might be your first question. I did not get fired. And what he said to me was, well, he gave an analogy. He said, well, you know, just because I don't have any children doesn't mean I can't talk about child rearing. And though in its simplest form, that may have been an analogy, I didn't think it was a good one. And I told him why. So there is always room for this conversation to be on the table. I think that particularly right now is an extremely fascinating time to even be alive and be able to speak and talk and interact in this country, because we are undergoing this reckoning around race relations. So whether things have really changed since the murder of George Floyd, I'll let you all decide on your own. I think I'll stop it there in terms of presentation and answer some questions. There seem to be several questions on the.
You have about 20 that are in the Q&A, and you also have one that came in. If you could start with this one that came in on the side from Professor John Zooks. He's one of our criminal justice professors here. I'm trying to locate it. Based on your personal experiences, how do you recommend criminal justice students, professionals, navigate a presence on social media?
How do I recommend?
So based on your personal experiences, how do you recommend criminal justice students and/or professionals navigate a presence on social media?
So it sounds like you mean how you present yourself on social media. That's a really good question, because I think there's a lot of due diligence now on folks that happens via their social media. So it may be a job, it may be a school, it may be any new role that you are about to take on. And this is essentially how people research you, as well as this is how police research people now as well on criminal matters. So your social media presence is very important, and it is sort of critical to who you are in the world at this point. So my best advice is to put your best foot forward and to think of it as a professional vehicle. So many people began and may still use it solely as a social vehicle, in which you are just playing around, dancing, making jokes, showing funny stuff. Some people use it for political purposes and promote politics, promote candidates, promote ideas. The one thing that I think should be foremost in your mind is, if someone looks from today back to the year 2010, what will they see about you on your social media? So if someone just literally was able to go back through every post of yours, what is it that they would learn about you? You may or may not want to talk about politics. You may be a politician later. Some view of yours may change or develop in a different way. You may, personally, I would avoid using it as a strictly social vehicle and think of it as a professional vehicle, in which you are putting out there what you want people to actually know about you in your best light. not necessarily about every single thing that you are doing every day, you know, posting yourself in different locations, eating different foods, that type of thing. But what you want people to know about your thoughts, about how you treat others, about how you approach your work, and about how you live your life and encourage other people to live their lives. So it should be, it really is, I think it can be a huge asset or a huge detractor based on your content. And so you should be really careful about how you use it and not think of it as purely social.
Okay, and you have about 22 questions in the Q&A feature.
I'm just going to go and look at, there may be a couple that were answered. I think the question about the gang activity. Oh, well, that may not have been answered. Let me answer that. This question is, did my boss dismiss the accusation about my gang activity, or did he take it seriously? It was a she, and she did not dismiss it. She actually asked, what is the symbol you're making? Which I thought was strange because she's probably 15 or so years older than me. And I thought that this was more her generation would know that symbol and that gesture and what it looked like and what it meant. But I had to explain that. And she essentially agreed with me by the end of the conversation that the allegation itself was a function of some type of bias that person had. So the person was somewhere in the middle. They didn't dismiss it, but didn't completely take it seriously either, but took it seriously enough to come to me with it. The next question reads, this is from Ms. Savignon. Through your experiences, do you think that there are still biases impacting the appointment of Black judges in Massachusetts? Where or have you seen improvements in increasing these appointments? What would you change in the appointment interview process to increase these numbers? Great question. This is something I also talk about a lot, which is the lack of diversity on this bench and on this court in particular, and on the courts in Massachusetts generally. The SJC, as you know, has had a better track record right now than the other courts of having some diversity. And I think the BMC, the Boston Municipal Court, does a decent job at obtaining diversity as well. The Superior Court and the Appeals Court and the other courts, I think, are still lacking, seriously lacking. The Superior Court, there are 2 Black judges, myself and Bill White. So right now you're looking at half of the Superior Court Black judges. The Appeals Court has 1 Black judge, Justice Ken Desmond, who is a friend of mine as well. And these numbers, this has gone down on my court since I've gotten on the court. So it's particularly dismaying. Do I think that bias is still impacting the appointment of Black judges? Yes, I do. Bias rears its head in every process in this country. And our judicial nominating and confirmation process is no different. So it's harder to study because it's such a closed and secretive process. It essentially mimics the federal process in which you fill out an application. It's very long and dramatic application. You get selected for an interview for the Judicial Nominating Commission, which is an interview with about 20 commissioners all at once. If you make it past that, you go to the Joint Bar Commission, who do some due diligence on you behind your back. If you make it past them with a thumbs up, then your application goes to the governor's office. And if he or she chooses, you will meet with the lawyer for that governor. And if you make it past that, then the governor can nominate you or not nominate. Once nominated, you then finally have to go before a body called the Governor's Council for a hearing that is similar to the congressional hearings for federal judges. And only that body can confirm your nomination to be a judge. And your seat as a judge in Massachusetts is a life term. So it's quite a process. There's a lot of moving parts to it, and there are a lot of areas of discretion. And so I do think that within that process, there are points at which bias is affecting the applications. And there are other reasons as well, obviously, that we have fewer judges of color on the bench, but I do think that that is one of them. I'm not sure what I would change in the process. That's probably a longer question. I have to think about that a little bit more. I'm going to continue with questions. Donna Walker asks, what, if anything, has the Criminal Justice Institute and Black jurists done to reduce the bail and jail sentences of those arrested who are Black and brown? And Black jurists, that's a good question. I can't give you a full answer as to what all is being done. I know that there is a bail fund that has been started in Massachusetts to assist folks who cannot make bail. And this is pretty successful, I believe, in helping folks who even with small amounts or relatively small amounts of bail cannot make it. And there are some requirements to be eligible to reach the monies in that fund. But I think that's been a good start at addressing the issue. In terms of jails, in terms of sentencing, that's a tougher nut to crack, because the sentencing is not something that is reviewed and easily reversible. So when you ask what are Black jurists doing, well, I think that the main thing that Black jurists are doing are becoming educated ourselves on this issue and trying to keep it in the forefront of our minds and in the forefront when we have classes and required education for judges. So this is a work in progress everywhere we go. There's individual work and there's group work, and I think people are doing different things, including things like keeping their own numbers. So I started doing this as well. One of my fellow judges, Peter Krupp on this court, began doing it, in which he started keeping the essentially demographics of his sentencing. So the race, gender, crime, and sentence for people that he is imposing sentences on, and keeping those numbers so that they can be studied and analyzed at some point for bias. And I started doing that years ago as well, and I know some other judges who do that. So I think right now our biggest effort is in the way of education. Some of your questions, I'm going to move on to another question. Some of them are related, so I'll try to hit different topics. Michael DeStefano asked, what made you decide to be a judge? Thank you for that question. The one reason I wanted to be a judge was to be able to have a wider impact on the laws in Massachusetts and how they are interpreted in Massachusetts. representing people and being an attorney, criminal or civil matters, you are essentially helping, one person at a time, one group at a time, one company at a time, whatever the case may be. And that work was very rewarding to me. As I got more and more into it, into litigation, I decided that I did want to be able to help, not just one person who may have, say, a motion to suppress evidence and trying to assist that person or get charges dismissed based on wrongful search and seizure, but also I wanted to be able to be among the people who decide how search and seizure is interpreted on a case-by-case basis, how we deal with exit orders, how we deal with OUIs, how we deal with people who are stopped and the interaction escalates to a search of the vehicle. So I wanted to have a wider impact on how the laws are interpreted for the citizens of this state. Graham Lane asks, what was the most difficult case you ever had to do, and how did you overcome it? Great question. I'll answer it from the practice perspective. There are difficult cases as a judge, but the difficulty is on a different level. I'm not, representing the person or making the arguments as you are when you are the lawyer. The most difficult case that I had as a lawyer was a quadruple murder. This was the last trial that I did as a lawyer in Massachusetts. And it was a case in which I represented a young man named Calvin Carnes. He was accused of murdering 4 of his friends in a house in Dorchester, in the basement studio of a house. And it was a crime that really shocked the neighborhood and the city. At the time, it was the deadliest murder that had occurred in the city of Boston. And it was a very long, hard-fought trial. And it was the last trial that I did before applying to the bench, and came onto the bench after that. The way I dealt with it was by working on it day in and day out, and having an awesome team surround me who helped me do so many parts of that and keep up with a trial of that size. That trial took about a month to try, and it had about 60 witnesses with everything at stake. And so that was definitely the toughest trial that I've had. I'm going to go on to another question. Brittany Nelson asks, what do I think can be done to combat racially biased arrests and or harsher sentencing and classification on African American people or Latino people here in Massachusetts? Great question. There's so many things that can be done. There's so much work that can be done. In some respects, by the time I interact with a person, it's not that it's too late, but a lot has already happened. We need to be working on this problem at every stage of discretion. This is really a problem of discretion. So if you think about it, think about your commute. You may have a commute to get to school, get to work, get home. And on your commute in rush hour times, you have a lot of lanes being ended, people having to merge from ramps, on ramps and off ramps. And you're constantly trying to decide whether to let someone in front of you or not. This is sort of constant. How do you make that decision? You sometimes you let people in, sometimes you won't. Maybe sometimes you feel in a good mood, maybe sometimes you're not. Maybe you see a person, they got a Marine Corps sticker on their car, you say, oh, good on you, let them in. Maybe there may be all sorts of reasons that you may just be a jerk when you're driving and not let anybody in. So you have discretion in those situations. When you're in your vehicle, everyone has an amount of discretion of how much courtesy you're going to give someone else. And I like to think about it that way because this is really what's happening at every stage of the criminal justice system. It's not just someone's obviously committed a crime, we all know it, and so there's some obvious conclusion. That's really not how it works. You know, there's discretion from the beginning to the end with whoever calls the police, then moving on to the police themselves, moving on to whoever's doing the charging, whether it's police or the DA's office, moving on to the DA and how to handle the case, the judge in how to handle it, and if there is a conviction or a plea, in how to sentence the person. There are a bunch of parts in there, individual actors, bosses, policies that all impact the person going through that system. So I think that the best way to combat racially biased arrests and decision-making in criminal justice is to further educate the people making those decisions. It's not enough to say, well, everyone's done their online check the box for your online bias training. We're all set with our racial bias. It's not that kind of issue. It's an ongoing issue that takes ongoing work and constant education for people to really get and police themselves when it comes to bias. So you and your class are not sitting with me every time I sentence someone, and me and your class aren't in the back pocket of every police officer who's interacting with a person on the street. So that means you've got to police yourself in your own decision making, in your own actions towards people. And it takes an amazing amount of self-awareness, situational awareness, and knowledge of history to really affect the numbers that we're talking about and really change the stats and get rid of racially biased arrests and decision making all along the way. So there's a lot that can be done, but again, I think it all comes back down to education, particularly about history and the history of this country. We don't do nearly enough along those lines. All right, I'm gonna try to answer as many questions as I can, even though I won't be able to get to all of them. Samantha asks about my tattoos. When did I start getting inked and at what age? Who does all of my work? Will I continue to get work done? Thank you for your question, Samantha. I started getting tattoos when I joined the Marine Corps. Surprise, surprise, lots of Marines get tattoos, touting their Marineness, and I was no different. My first tattoo is an eagle, globe, and anchor that's on my leg, and it just took off from there. I started getting them before they were even legal in Massachusetts, so I got mine in Rhode Island, and that was probably around 1995. The most significant work, the more visible work that you see, the sleeve and the neck, I've gotten done recently while I've been on the bench. Will I continue to get work done? Yes. And who does it? An amazing artist He is in Salem, Massachusetts. His name is Matt Driscoll, and he's at a place called the Ninth Realm in Salem. Just an amazing artist all around, not just tattooing, but an actual artist. And if you go to his shop, you'll see why I say that. Thank you for that question. Jill Glidden asks, was your decision to join the Marines as well as becoming a lawyer a way of giving you an armor of protection against the implicit bias? Awesome question. No, it really was not. You know, believe it or not, my focus in my life really has not been on bias. It has become that more recently, where I focus on that, talk about it, work on it, help others with it. But it really was not my focus as I grew up. I became a Marine because I wanted to do something I wanted to do something in addition to law, and I wanted that something to be physical, at least in part. So I took the firefighter's exam for Massachusetts. I was almost a firefighter here. I learned about the Marine Corps, enjoyed that while I was in law school. This was something I thought would bring all of my disciplines together. I could have the physical element, I could practice law, I could serve the country. It was a way to sort of do it all. So it really was not, for me, considered as an armor of protection, because even at that point, I didn't really know that I needed that armor. I didn't know that I needed armor at that point. An anonymous attendee asked, how do you reconcile your position in the criminal justice system, particularly in regards to the bad apples argument, with your racial experience? So I'm going to try to answer this question. I think the question is sort of, given the statistics and everything I've just told you about the disparities that my court and this whole trial court creates in Massachusetts, how do I reconcile being on this court with my racial experience? That is a fantastic question, and it's one that I really think about every day. I think about it in terms of why I came on the bench. I think about it in terms of, okay, how do I do my work? And am I going to do things any differently than the average white judge is doing? I think about it in terms of how long I'm going to be doing this and whether or not to do what else to do beyond this. It is difficult to reconcile, but I think that in general, in any system, whether the system is plagued by racism and bias or not, there is room for work on the outside of it and room for work on the inside of it. And so I try not to limit myself, and I try to work in both of those realms. So it may not be a complete reconciliation. It may just be sort of a loose association, more so. Christina Alvis asked, what were the 3 books that I offered to my colleague? Great question. One book was called Tally's Corner, and that's an old book. It's about a sociologist who studied the Black men in a particular neighborhood, in a particular city, by living in that neighborhood for a while with them. It just was a very interesting read, I thought, and one that I thought was good from an outsider's perspective. Beloved, which is one of my favorite books of all times, was another one, and talks specifically, is specifically about Black families and Black motherhood. The third one was a book that I can't think of the name of it, and I haven't been able to think of the name of it for some time. I can't find it, but it was a book that was a book of vignettes, and there were these short stories from prominent Black people who had made it, so to speak. People like Colin Powell and Anita Allen. And so these people told stories about their experiences around race that may be surprising to people, how no matter what level you're at, you're going to be facing microaggressions, bias, racism. And I thought that was particularly instructive too, although I can't think of the name of it. So those were the books. Sydney Parker asks, what words of advice do you have to young women or an individual or any individual who aims to advance in a career as a criminal justice professional, whether it be civilian or military, and the best way in which to combat challenges faced? Great question, Sydney. I always answer this question in this way. As a student, as someone beginning your career, your focus should not be on bias and those types of challenges. Your focus should be on merit alone. So this is what I mean. It does not matter where you're coming from, what you look like, what your background is. When you are the best person at what you are doing, you are more than halfway to where you want to be by that alone. So when the person asked, did I go into the Marine Corps and come on the bench and do some things as an armor to protect myself from bias? And I said, no, because I didn't know I needed it. My focus was on being the best Marine I could be, being the best lawyer I could be, being the best trial lawyer I could be. And so I focused on my craft and on the skills that make the craft, not on the challenges that people may throw in my way. And that is what you want when you are out of the room. You want someone to say, oh, yeah, you should give that to Frison because she really is good at trial, or she really knows how to handle these complex criminal matters, or she's a really hard worker. She's going to work hard for the clients, or she's really good with the judges. She's a good oral advocate. That's what you want said and known about you. If you are going to be, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're going to be. If you're going to be an actor, if you're going to be a basketball player, if you're going to be a lawyer, if you're going to be a doctor, you should be focusing on the trade itself and being the best at it, because that is your best attack against any bias. That's your best defense, against any attack that's based on bias or race or things that should not matter, is merit. You know what you're doing, you do it well, you're the best at it. That's the advice that I would give to anyone who is beginning a career in criminal justice. And it would actually be the same advice no matter what type of career you're going into. The bias that you're going to face is going to be there. It doesn't matter if you do everything you've dreamed of or none of it. You're still going to be dealing with bias. And the best way to combat it is to be the best at what you're doing. So if you're in school, study hard and be the best at it. If you are going into criminal justice, going to be a probation officer, going to be a police officer, whatever it is, your merit should speak for itself and should be advanced, be ahead of you and precede you in any conversation in any room.
Okay, Justice Frison, we have time for one final question.
Okay, all right. Let me just look through here. The last question is from Krishana White, who says, do you think someone that is shy to speak can ever become a lawyer or judge? If so, what advice do you have for those who are shy to speak? Great question. And absolutely, you can become a lawyer or a judge, or a lawyer and a judge, even if you are currently shy and feel that you're too shy to speak. So you weren't too shy to ask the question. You weren't too shy to put your name on the question. This is not anonymous. And so you're on the way. You're getting there already. The best advice I can give you, if you're shy in public speaking, is to do it as much as you can. Every opportunity, whether it's in a class or in something extracurricular, that you get to be in front of people and speak, you should do it. And it can be in class, it can be at a workplace, it can be at church, it can be wherever. But every opportunity you get, do it over and over and over again. And at some point, the shyness will be more subdued. You'll always be nervous doing public speaking, and you should be nervous, but you will at some point not be too shy, at least, to do it. Do it as often as you can.
Okay, thank you, Justice Shannon Frison. So before we close out the program, I wanted to read something that came in to you from Brittany Nelson. Thank you. So amazing to hear you speak. You are an inspiration. I agree. Better training and ongoing education is a must. So that's what we're doing here at Cape Cod Community College, or 4Cs. Ongoing training, not just annual events about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but ongoing training, ongoing events. Right now, today, we actually have 2 events at the same time. Some might say, well, that's for planning. No, it isn't. That's where this institution is moving. We're honoring the mission statement. We're honoring Department of Higher Ed's touch points for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and infusing our curricula for our students. I also want to mention something that I didn't share with everybody. I'm not sure Justice Frison covered it, especially for our dual enrollment students who are out there. She was our class valedictorian, and she was an AP student. We have a lot of AP students who come here, and now they take these things called the College Board. So they're actually gaining college credit, 3 credits for some of those courses that they didn't have maybe back in the 90s. So I wanted to mention that she was a class valedictorian. Please remember some of the past guests. Go to www.capecod.edu IDEA, and you will see some of the past guests. A few went straight to YouTube, and take a look there. You will see Ana Mendez Broder, who immigrated from Guatemala, who told her story, immigrated here at age 30. There are numerous guests, countless, who are advocates for people who do not have a voice or feel that they do not have a voice. And we are trying to continue with this program. I appreciate everyone's support. There are a lot of people here from different colleges, from Suffolk County, Middlesex County, names I recognize. We have Sturgis Public Library. Here we have BU Wheelock. We have James Morgan that we need to give a shout out to. He's our newly hired math specialist who's going to help close some of those achievement gaps and help get women into STEM. We have Deputy Superintendent Eddie Crispin from Boston Police Department, and our leadership, VP Dr. Varenos, and Vice President Christopher Clark. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And once again, I'm going to close it out with thank you, stay well, stay blessed, and most of all, stay lifted. And thank you for joining us, Intentional Critical Conversation. Have a good day.